Hello! This is not normal, I know. You don't usually see me like this, but, you know, I didn't want to edit like a whole thing of visuals for something like this. So I'm going to be pointing to things and having things appear because that's much more fun and it makes me feel like an actual person. What am I talking about today? I want to talk about femboys. There's a problem in the femboy community. There's been a problem for years at this point. What is that problem? The ambiguity and lack of clarity of the word itself. The term has been corrupted, conflated, shunned, and weaponized. And I have no idea why. In fact, I don't think it deserves the flak that it gets. And I'll explain why. I like to start out by defining a femboy to make my job and your life a little easier. So, what is a femboy? Well, and there's your first problem. The definition of a femboy is spotty, different for everybody, and some refuse the term because of gender identity or the mere idea of what it represents to the wide public. For all intents and purposes, the people who refuse the term have every right to. If we take the word itself at face value, femboy would simply mean feminine boy. But there's more to a word than just its definition. In fact, many negative words come from seemingly average roots, like villain from Latin villanus, meaning farmhand, or vulgar coming from a word meaning of the common people. There are alternative terms to combat the negative connotations, like rose boy and soft boy, but these are not widely accepted. Plus, soft boy has branched off to become its own term separate from femboy. So let's go back to the first question. What do people consider to be a femboy? Well, let's start with dictionaries. Dictionary.com describes a femboy as a young man who displays feminine characteristics. Urban Dictionary describes both feminine acting and feminine dressing men. Urban Dictionary is a very reliable source, I know. Merriam-Webster combines the two meanings. Yeah, no real consensus there, I'm still getting mismatching definitions. Based on the consensus of what I've seen the lay people describe to be a femboy online, I made this Venn diagram. I imagine it's a bit flawed, but I needed to make sense of how people perceive these different types of people. But it's not at all universal. Some people consider femboy to be a simple identity, others find it to be a lifestyle, and others have more questionable ideas of what a femboy is. But we'll get into that later. So I took a poll, and I asked people what the term meant to them, and a couple other important questions we'll touch on later. I got around 8 responses, which were probably mostly my friends, I admit, but I could not be bothered to solicit anybody. So let's have a look. Of the 8 who responded, 5 are femboys themselves, so bias is possible, but 3 describe a man who exhibits feminine traits, 2 describe a man who enjoys feminine things. 1 describes them as generally submissive, while another rejects that notion entirely. You can see how different people's views on femboys are and how there's no real agreement, even in such a small sample size. And also, someone wrote my name. I'm flattered, but no, I'm not one. Further down, 8 of 8 people do not consider femboys inherently sexual. That is surprising, not a single yes answer. I expected at least 1, but I didn't see a single one. And yes, 8 people is nowhere near enough to get conclusive data, but I couldn't ask more people without feeling like I was harassing people. And even just 8 people gave me more information than I would have gotten not asking anyone at all. So there's that. Moving on from polls and definitions. Part of the stigma against femboys and the term itself is that they supposedly always act sexual or are inherently sexual. Are they? Well, think about it. It's a very black and white way of thinking, and most people seem to think this because of the popular VTubers who make sex jokes left and right, or those who use suggestive art and titles to draw people into their videos by clickbait. This creates a stereotype of hypersexuality and harms the image of the community, and by extension the term itself. And I understand why it happens, but it's nowhere near true. I think VTuber Velky sums it up best.
I think a lot of people tend to misunderstand. Like, people say, oh, you're a femboy? Oh, that means you're lewd. It means you're sexual. That's what the people have an idea of when they hear femboy. A lot of people are upset since, like, people instantly get the idea that, oh, you're a femboy, you have to be lewd, and then they kind of, like, basically get, like, harassed. Like, you tell them to, like, do really lewd things that they're just not comfortable with.
Imagine if I told you that tomboys were inherently sexual. You'd look at me funny, right? But somehow people have this stigma around femboys and don't think twice about it. Why? Well, a lot of people conflate the different types of femboys, and each person has a different idea of what a femboy is, based on how they were first exposed to it. Some of them know a femboy as a femme-passing man, others a man who simply likes feminine things, and others a man who simply acts feminine in nature. But a portion of the population first heard of them from art and videos. This corrupts people's views of them and makes them act in disgusting ways. There's even people who forego the idea of femininity, and their definition is just based on a person's shape. Seriously? We cannot forget that femboys, like anyone else, are people amongst us and deserve the same human rights and respect bestowed upon us. I know plenty of them, and none of them are constantly making sex jokes. Another reason why the term could be shunned could be subconscious. It's pretty deep-rooted in some people's subconscious mind that a man should not or cannot be feminine or dress femininely, but that's speculative. There's also a large body of hatred and harm towards femboys from members of the trans community who either claim that they are just trans femmes in denial, or that they shouldn't exist at all. The opposite is also true with femboys targeting trans femmes, and neither side is correct. Trans femmes and femboys can coexist, the same way trans mascs and tomboys can coexist. So what is my actual problem with the term? Well, it's this idea that if you are a femboy, you have to be perfect, you have to be young, you have to be skinny, you have to look like a girl, and your legs need to be perfectly smooth. I've seen examples of this, like when VTuber Grand Soul Freak was literally harassed into deleting a picture from his YouTube community page just because his leg was a bit hairy. And when Line Shoe supported the idea that a femboy doesn't need to fit the definition perfectly, he was seen as simply saving face. There exists gatekeeping in the community, just because there's some people who don't fit the already ambiguous parameters to meet the definition. But what good does that do? The femboy aesthetic is a form of expression, one that's already pretty looked down upon, and that expression can be from personality, style of dress, and look itself. Gatekeeping only harms the confidence of those who need it desperately. Nobody's born a femboy, let's be honest. There are people who are skinny and smooth and aren't femboys. The term itself, given the many different definitions, is a spectrum of people, not just a specific type of person. It is a wide spectrum covering identity, fashion, personality, the lot. Some pillars may be higher or lower, but everything from one end to another is a femboy. So with all that said, what is the problem with the term? Is there really one? Yes, it's misinterpreted and sometimes even weaponized, but it describes a spectrum of a unique type of people. I think the term deserves justice, and for people to stop thinking of it as a bad thing. A femboy is just a man who likes feminine things, or a man who acts feminine, or you get the point. I don't usually do stuff like this, and so I hope people actually like it, and I hope I sounded fine, because I'm not used to reading off a script. Take care, it's a desert out there. I'll see you all later, ladies, Johnnies, and MDs.